What's going on, guys? Today we are going to talk about Watford and specifically Watford's owners because there is a huge problem here. And the problem isn't the players underperforming on the pitch, which I think they are. There are plenty of good players here. The problem isn't that they got relegated, which is obviously a huge issue. The problem here is the owners and the way they think football works and the trigger happiness that they seem to have when it comes to managers. They fired 3 managers this year, one with 2 games to go, which was inexplicable to me. Even if you have a manager that you may not think is working out with Nigel Pearson, which is fine. We're gonna ignore Pearson, even though he took over in December and was 6 points behind relegation, and with 2 games to go, he was outside the relegation zone, and we're gonna ignore all that. We're gonna ignore all that. Even if you thought Pearson was a bad manager, which is fine. You get to a point with 2 games in the season to go where everybody's fighting for their lives. Obviously, Pearson's at the head of that in the locker room or, in the dressing room. Out on the pitch, he's obviously doing his best. And then you take him out of the equation and put someone in who's never really managed before. And he's kind of just been hanging around the club. Obviously, he's there every day and, working with the team and everything like that. But how in tune with the team could he be to be thrust into a situation like this, where you're comfortable thrusting him into a situation like this? 2 games to go, fighting relegation, you just need a point or 2 or whatever it ended up being. I can't personally see the logic behind such a move. It's a ridiculous move to me. But this isn't something that Watford are not used to. This is something that happens quite a bit. As we said, 3 managers fired this year. It's not the first time they've gone through a season and gotten rid of managers before like this. And eventually, this happens. This is always the result. Relegation. It's always the result. It happened with Newcastle. Of course, he was a different type of bad owner. He never really put money into the club and kind of just sucked money out of it. Wasn't really, looking into trying to keep the team or trying to get the team to move forward. He was more interested in keeping them up and collecting the money over at Newcastle, but eventually that caught up. He was also a little bit trigger happy with managers, but he was also not so great at hiring, in my opinion. But different type of situation, but the same result. Relegation, you go down. When you are a club and your owner has his hand in the pot just a little bit too much, you don't really hit the heights you normally would, unless your owner really knows what he's talking about, really knows what he's doing. There are some people who know what they're doing, which is fine. And then there are owners who own the club and sort of know what they're doing, but also have people around them who tend to know what they're doing, and it doesn't just seem to have any of that over at Watford. Now, Watford are in an incredibly difficult position because Watford are going to have to let players go. There are a lot of good players there who I assume are on better than championship money. I don't know if they're going to ride, those good players and kind of take the loss on the year to try and move back up into the Premier League first time. I'm not so sure how that's going to happen. But there are plenty of players who are too good to be sitting down there. Ismail Sarr probably, Decore, too good. There are just players who are too good to be sitting in the championship, and I imagine there'll be plenty of players who have quite a bit of interest. And you're also going to be in a situation where some of these players are going to want to leave. It's time to go. They've already made up their mind. They're not playing in the championship. and they're waiting for someone else to come along and ask them if they want to move, and they're going to attempt to force that move, and it's a very tricky situation. Now, for owners like Watford's, how long before, one, you get a new manager in, two, how long before that person's inevitably sacked, right? If the new Watford manager comes in and buys the players he wants, and they, get that off, and then they get off to a bad start, then he's gone, right? Knowing Watford, I mean, they fired their first manager this year very quickly, about a month in, I think, 5, 6, 7 games in. You don't have any time there to have anything work out. So if something goes wrong and he's sacked 4 or 5 games in, you've spent money now on players he wanted, didn't work. Your new manager is going to come in and kind of be stuck with the players that are there, whether he works with them or not, or whether he can work with them or not. He's going to want his own players, and you get stuck in this never-ending cycle when you don't have any continuity. And that is something that never seems to happen at Watford. There is zero continuity. There are places where continuity is, let's say, where continuity is perfect. A lot of you may not realize this one, but if you watch American basketball, the Spurs, San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich, he's been there for ages now. But when he first showed up, they weren't very good. But they kept at it, he kept at it, and he won a couple titles, and he's had plenty of really good teams, and he's still obviously a really good coach. But you need that continuity. You get it in Bournemouth, who aren't going to sack Eddie Howe, and I expect Bournemouth to have a good year next year. The finances are a little bit odd there, and they probably need somebody better who's going to buy players. They've been not so great in the transfer market, but Eddie Howe is a good manager, and Eddie Howe kept them in the Premier League despite very few crowds. I imagine not a ton of money coming in. As I said, they haven't been buying particularly well, but against all that, Eddie Howe's done well, and he is going to go down with Bournemouth, and if he stays, he'll probably come back up with them. But you need that continuity to really, really set yourself forward and go ahead and really, you got to let the manager do what he does, especially good managers. Jurgen Klopp came into Liverpool 5-6 years ago. Don't remember the exact year. I think it was 5. And they didn't really have a great first year, and not the greatest of second years, of course, but they kept at it, kept backing him, and eventually they are where they are now. Champions of the Premier League, defending champions of the Champions League, Club World Cup champions, Super Cup champions, of course, and just having that continuity really helps. A really good example would probably be Chelsea, actually, of this Watford team. Chelsea always have the money, regardless of what's going on. Chelsea have the money. They've spent £100 million already. The window hasn't opened up yet, and they're probably going to spend another £100 million on players during a time when plenty of clubs aren't going to spend any money. But they are pretty trigger happy with managers. Di Matteo won the Champions League, was sacked. Mourinho was sacked relatively quickly, though Mourinho has a habit of causing problems in the dressing room as of late. There are managers who go in there and get sacked relatively quickly. But Chelsea also have a history of jumping in and out of the top 4. They have a couple of years in, and they have a year or two out. Couple of years in, every once in a while they have a really bad finish, like 8th. It's something Chelsea do, but that is 100% down to continuity, whether they think it's the manager's good enough or whatever it may be. But Chelsea, if you look at the top teams, maybe top 6 or 7 in the Premier League, the big 6 or 7 if you want to call it that: Liverpool, United, Chelsea, City, Tottenham, Arsenal. When you look at all those teams across the board, outside of this year and maybe last year, those teams were consistently there. Chelsea was the only one that bounced around the most. They were up and down and up and down. Tottenham, probably on the edge of being one of the bigger clubs, of course, bounce up and down because they don't have the resources like some of the bigger clubs do and things like that. And they were kind of fighting in that sense. But Chelsea always jump around. And that's down to swapping managers out relatively often. Often for a big side, very often for a big side. But that is the perfect example. Watford are currently going through that, but at the wrong end of the table. So their jumping around is going to be a lot of relegations, promotions, relegations, bad years in the Championship, bad years in the Premier League. It's all going to jump around down in that platform instead of up toward the top and, in the middle 8, between 1 and 8 or 9 like Chelsea tend to jump. Theirs is going to be more like bottom 5 of the Premier League to, top 10 of the Championship. They're going to be those types of jumps. And it's all down to the same type of owner. Abramovich has his money. Abramovich goes to all the games. Whether Abramovich, I don't know what to call Abramovich. I don't want to say he doesn't know too much or he doesn't listen as much to the people around him, but Abramovich doesn't take failure very well, so he's very jumpy. And I guess the Watford owners are kind of like that as well. A couple bad results and they're ready to pull the trigger and move the next man in to try and do it. It's just not good for players. It's just not good. It's not good for the club. It's not good for players. It's not good for attracting managers either. I mean, how many managers are going to look at the Watford job, which it's going to be a job. It's going to be a difficult job. How many people are going to look at it and go, how long am I really going to be here? If things don't go well immediately, I'm going to be gone. You want to maybe try to go to a more stable environment where things aren't as trigger happy and, huge decisions aren't made on 3 or 4 games. And everything just sinks and sinks and sinks. And you worry for Watford. As I said, they're probably going to have a big overhaul. There are a lot of players there who are too good for the Championship. Pereira, Ismail Yassar, Dini might retire, Decore in midfield. There are just way too many good players here. De La Feu. I don't expect De La Feu, Sarr, Decore, Pereira. I don't expect any of those 4 to be there next year. You're going to need to replace those 4 to me. Too many big clubs are going to come calling. It's going to be difficult to resist, especially when you go down and the finances of all of a sudden just falling out from underneath you. It's a huge step down in terms of money. You're going to get the parachute funds, of course, but they're to help you out. They're not long term. They're not something that are going to keep coming. It's just to help you out. It's almost like it's obviously named after what it is, parachutes fund. They're just to help you get to the ground. But once you're on the ground, that's it. So it's just very difficult. It's a very difficult situation, and Watford fans, I imagine, will be very anxious this summer. Next year, it's going to be a very anxious wait, because you can just tell with the ownership, with the management, that this might be it. You might end up, if you don't go straight back up, this might be one of those teams that, become a regular in the Championship, become the new Stoke, become the new Huddersfield. It feels like one of those situations, and I imagine as a fan of the club, it's very worrying. But guys, let me know how you guys feel about the ownership, about the situation there at Watford. But yeah, it's nothing else I can say, but anxious times ahead, I imagine, at Watford, guys. But that is going to be it. I hope you folks, of course, have enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more. And peace.